He had nothing left. No home, no family. Just a broken past and a loyal dog by his side. Then one morning, a homeless veteran Navy SEAL spent his last $10 on a forgotten train depot in the middle of the forest. What he didn't know was that something had been waiting inside for over 60 years. Not hidden by accident, but left there for someone who needed it most. As his dog began acting strange, drawn to something beneath the floor, the truth slowly started to surface. And what they found would not only change his life, but give him a second chance he thought he didn't deserve. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories. The morning came in quietly, the kind of cold that didn't bite so much as linger, resting on the edges of things, settling into the cracks of wood and bone alike. Sunlight filtered through tall pines, pale gold against the lingering frost, turning the northern forest into something almost forgiving. Ethan Calder sat behind the wheel of his old pickup truck, engine off, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel as if he had forgotten what they were supposed to do next. He was 43 years old, tall, just over 6 feet, broad-shouldered with the kind of lean, hardened build that didn't fade easily, even years after leaving the military. His face was all angles and restraint, a defined jawline shadowed by uneven stubble, the kind that came from not caring enough to shave, but not forgetting entirely. His eyes were a muted blue-gray, steady but distant, like they had learned long ago not to expect anything from the world in front of them. His skin was weathered, sun-browned, and marked faintly by old cuts that had healed without ceremony. His hair was short, dark brown, clipped in the practical military style he had never quite let go of. At the temples, threads of early silver had begun to show, not from age, but from something heavier. He wore the same outfit he had worn for days, maybe longer. An olive field jacket, worn at the cuffs and elbows. Beneath it, a red and dark blue plaid shirt, half-buttoned, dark cargo pants, creased from sleeping in them, brown leather boots, scuffed and softened with years of use. On his wrist, a scratched military watch. In his pocket, a small folding knife. Behind the seat, a weathered Eberly stock half-track backpack. Everything he owned reduced to something that could be carried without thought. It wasn't that he had nothing. It was that nothing had chosen to stay. Beside the truck, a German shepherd stood motionless. Ronan. 5, maybe 6 years old. Black and tan coat, short and dense, the muscle beneath it visible even in stillness. His posture was balanced, alert without tension. The quiet readiness of something trained not to panic. His eyes were focused, dark and intelligent, always moving, tracking scent, sound, the invisible language of a world Ethan could no longer fully read. Ronan had been a military working dog once. Like Ethan, he had been trained to move toward danger instead of away from it. Like Ethan, he had been left behind when the war ended, not because he had failed, but because there was nowhere else for him to go. They had found each other in the aftermath. Or maybe, Ethan sometimes thought, they had simply stopped pretending they were meant to be anywhere else. Ethan reached down and adjusted the old watch on his wrist. The glass was scratched, the edges worn smooth from years of use. It had stopped once, a long time ago, during a mission he tried not to remember. But it was working now, ticking, still moving forward, whether it made sense or not. He glanced at the passenger seat, empty except for a folded blanket, and then back out at the forest road stretching ahead. There were places he could go, towns where no one knew his name, jobs that paid just enough to keep the engine running. But none of them felt like destinations. They were just pauses. The town appeared almost by accident. A narrow stretch of road broke away from the forest, leading to a cluster of buildings that seemed older than they had any right to be. A gas station, a diner with faded signage, and a small municipal office tucked between them like an afterthought. Ethan pulled in, more out of habit than intention. Ronan stepped out first, landing lightly on the gravel. He paused, scanning, ears flicking once before settling. No tension, no threat. Ethan followed, stretching his back before heading toward the municipal building. Inside, the air was warmer, but stale, carrying the scent of old paper and coffee that had been sitting too long. Behind a wooden counter sat a woman in her mid-50s, slightly heavy-set, with short brown hair streaked with gray. She wore thin-framed glasses and a simple knit sweater the color of worn wool. Dorothy Hale. She looked up as Ethan entered, her eyes quick, assessing but not unkind. "You passing through?" she said, not quite a question. Ethan gave a small nod. Something like that. Her gaze shifted briefly past him, toward the door where Ronan now stood just outside, watching. "That your dog?" "Yes, ma'am." She studied Ethan again, then returned to the paperwork in front of her. "Town doesn't get many visitors this time of year." "I'm not staying long." Most people who say that end up staying longer than they planned. There was no humor in her voice, just observation. Ethan didn't respond. He noticed the bulletin board off to the side almost by accident. It was cluttered with notices, lost tools, community meetings, a church bake sale long since past. And there, pinned near the bottom, was a single sheet of paper, slightly curled at the edges. County surplus property, final clearance. His eyes moved over the list without much interest. Old storage sheds, a collapsed barn, and then abandoned train depot, $10, administrative transfer, scheduled for demolition, spring. Ethan stared at it for a moment longer than necessary. A train depot. He wasn't sure why that word felt heavier than it should have. Behind him, the door creaked open. Ronan stepped inside. But instead of moving toward Ethan, the dog stopped halfway across the room. He turned his head slowly and looked directly at the paper. Still. Focused. Then, without a sound, he shifted his gaze past the wall, past the building, toward the direction of the forest beyond town. Ethan felt it then. Not logic, not reason. Something quieter, something older. Ronan took a single step forward, then stopped. His body went still. Not tense, not aggressive, just fixed. As if he had recognized something Ethan couldn't see. His nose lifted slightly, catching a scent that didn't belong to the room or the town, or even the present moment. For a brief second, Ethan had the strange, unshakable feeling that the dog wasn't reacting to something ahead, but to something that had been waiting. Waiting a long time. Ethan looked back at the paper. $10? He said. Dorothy didn't look up. Administrative fee. Property's been abandoned since the 50s. County wants it off their hands before they tear it down. No one's taken it? She gave a small shake of her head. Roof's half gone. No power, no water. Liability nightmare. A pause. Most folks prefer things that aren't already falling apart. Ethan let that sit for a moment. Then, almost without thinking, he reached into his pocket. A worn $10 bill, his last. He set it on the counter. Dorothy looked up now, really looked at him. You serious? Ethan glanced once more at Ronan. The dog hadn't moved. Yeah, he said quietly. I think I am. Dorothy studied him for a long moment, then pulled a ledger closer. Well, she muttered, reaching for a pen. Guess it's yours then. The drive out to the depot took less than 15 minutes. The road narrowed quickly, swallowed again by trees that grew thicker, older, less forgiving. Eventually, the pavement gave way to packed dirt, then to something that barely qualified as a path. Ethan parked when the road simply ended. They walked the rest of the way, and then, through the trees, it appeared. The depot. It stood in a clearing that felt too deliberate to be natural, as if the forest had once been pushed back, and was now slowly reclaiming what had been taken. The building itself was low and long, constructed of weathered wood that had faded into a dull, gray-brown. The roof sagged in places, one side partially collapsed. The windows were boarded or broken, the platform warped and covered in moss. Beyond it, barely visible beneath layers of leaves and thyme, ran the ghost of an old rail line. Ethan stopped a few steps short. For a moment, neither he nor Ronan moved. The air felt different here, quieter, not empty, just waiting. Ronan stepped forward first, slowly, deliberately. He didn't run, didn't explore like a normal dog would. He walked straight toward the depot and stopped at the edge of the platform. Then he looked back at Ethan. Not curious, not uncertain, just sure. Ethan exhaled slowly, the sound barely visible in the cold air. "Yeah," he murmured, more to himself than to the dog. "I see it too." He stepped up onto the platform, the wood creaking softly under his weight. The door hung slightly ajar. Inside, darkness and dust. And something else. Something he couldn't name yet, but something that made the small hairs at the back of his neck rise, not in fear, but in recognition. Like walking into a place that didn't belong to you, and realizing, slowly, that it might. The door gave way with a slow, tired groan, as if it had been holding its breath for years and had finally decided to let it out. Ethan stepped inside first. The air was colder than outside, not because of the weather, but because the building itself had forgotten how to hold warmth. Dust hung in the light like fine ash, drifting through thin beams of sunlight that slipped past broken boards nailed over the windows. Every step he took echoed softly, not loud enough to feel empty, but just enough to remind him he wasn't the first to stand here. Ronan followed a second later. The dog did not rush in. He crossed the threshold with a deliberate step, head low, nose working the air. His ears flicked once, then stilled. His body remained relaxed, but there was a subtle shift in the way he held himself. Less like a companion, more like something on duty. Ethan noticed that. He always noticed. The interior stretched longer than he expected. To the right, a waiting area. Wooden bench along the wall, worn smooth by decades of use. The floor beneath it was slate, scuffed into a dull gray by countless footsteps that had long since vanished. To the left, a freight space. Half-collapsed roof above it, beams exposed, letting in a pale rectangle of sky. And straight ahead, the ticket counter. It stood beneath a protruding bay window, the glass mostly intact but clouded with age. Behind it, a small enclosed booth, no more than 6 feet across, where someone had once sat and watched trains come and go, marking time with nothing but a pen and a schedule. Above the window, barely visible under layers of dust and fading paint, were the words, Whitlock Junction, Penn RR. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Still standing," he muttered. Not impressive, not intact, but still here. He walked deeper into the room, boots pressing into the floorboards with a dull, steady rhythm. Each step felt heavier than it should have, not physically, but in the way certain places demanded awareness. There was a black pot-bellied stove in the far corner, its iron surface dulled but intact. A rusted pipe ran upward through the ceiling, bent slightly where the roof had sagged. He ran a hand over it. Cold. Dead. But not broken. He moved to the wall where an old board hung, once used to track arrivals and departures. Most of the chalk had long since faded, but one line remained, faint but stubborn. 6:42 p.m. Eastbound. Final. Ethan stared at it longer than he meant to. Final. Not delayed, not cancelled, just final. Behind him, Ronan's nails clicked softly against the wood. Ethan turned. The dog had stopped near the ticket counter. Again. Not pacing, not exploring, just standing. His nose hovered just above the edge of the wood, drawing in slow, measured breaths. Then he shifted slightly, stepping closer to the base of the counter and lowered his head. Ethan watched. "Something there?" he asked quietly. Ronan didn't look up. Ethan moved toward him, slower now. Up close, the counter looked worse. Wood chipped at the edges, varnish peeling in thin, brittle strips. But something about it felt preserved. Like the damage had happened around it, not to it. He stepped around to the side and pushed open the narrow door into the ticket booth. It creaked open with resistance, the hinges stiff but not seized. Inside, the space was small, tight. A wooden stool stood behind the desk, one leg slightly shorter than the others. A row of pigeonholes lined the wall above the counter, meant for tickets, receipts, schedules, now empty, but still holding the faint outline of purpose. On the floor, near the corner, sat a small iron safe. Closed. Locked. Ethan crouched slightly, examining it, then shook his head. Later. Behind him there was a sudden, sharp sound. Not loud, but wrong. Ethan turned instantly, hand already moving toward the knife in his pocket. Ronan had stepped back from the counter, not startled, not aggressive, but alert in a way that was different from before. The dog stood completely still, staring at the floor just in front of the booth entrance. Then, slowly, he lifted one paw and placed it down again, carefully. The wood beneath it gave a faint, hollow thud. Not the solid knock of old timber. Something else. Something underneath. Ronan did it again. Same spot, same sound. And then he looked up at Ethan. Not asking. Telling. Ethan didn't move right away. He stood there, listening. The building had its own sounds. The wind slipping through cracks, the distant creak of weakened beams, the soft settling of dust disturbed by movement. But that sound, that hollow note under Ronan's paw, it didn't belong to the rest of it. He stepped forward, slowly this time. "All right," he said under his breath. "Let's see." He crouched near the spot, pressing his palm flat against the floor. The wood was colder here, not by much, but enough. He shifted his weight slightly, pressing down harder. There, a subtle give. Not visible, but felt. He knocked lightly with his knuckles. Solid. Then moved an inch to the side, knocked again. Different. The sound changed. Not louder, not clearer, but deeper, like it was echoing into something that wasn't supposed to be there. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "Yeah," he murmured. "I hear it." He sat back on his heels, eyes scanning the boards. At first glance, they looked identical. Same grain, same wear. But then, a difference. Barely noticeable. The boards beneath the booth were a shade darker. Not new, not old. Just different. He ran his fingers along the seam where they met the rest of the floor. There was a gap. Clean, intentional. Not the uneven split of wood aging over time. A cut, measured, placed. Ronan shifted closer, lowering himself to the ground beside Ethan. His breathing was steady, controlled, but his eyes never left the spot. Waiting. Ethan glanced at him. "You been smelling this the whole time?" The dog didn't respond, of course, but he didn't look away either. Ethan stood and walked back into the freight area. He searched through what remained. Splintered crates, rusted hooks, broken planks stacked haphazardly in one corner. Most of it was useless. But then, a length of flat iron, bent slightly, one end worn smooth. He picked it up, testing the weight in his hand. Good enough. Back in the booth, the air felt tighter. Not threatening, just focused. He slid the edge of the iron into the seam between the darker boards and the rest of the floor. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, he applied pressure. The wood resisted. Years of stillness holding it in place. But slowly, reluctantly, it began to give. A faint crack. Dust rising. Ronan didn't move. Ethan paused, not because he was tired, but because something in his chest had shifted. A familiar tension, the kind that came before breaching a door or opening something that might not want to be opened. He exhaled slowly. "This is stupid," he muttered. But he didn't stop. The board lifted a fraction of an inch. Enough. He adjusted his grip and pulled harder. The section came up together. Not loose pieces, but a single panel, hinged on one side by something that creaked faintly as it moved. Leather. Old, but still holding. Ethan froze for just a second. Not fear. Recognition. This had been made to be opened. Just not easily. He lifted it higher, and the darkness beneath shifted into shape. A compartment, small, hidden between the floor joists, and inside, something wrapped, still, waiting. Ronan leaned forward slightly, nose twitching, but didn't cross the line, didn't touch it, didn't interfere. He simply watched. The way a soldier watches another step into something unknown. Ethan stared down into the compartment. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't reach in, didn't speak. The forest outside remained silent. The station held its breath. And somewhere, deep beneath the layers of time and dust, something that had been left behind had finally been found. For a long moment, Ethan didn't reach into the compartment. He stayed exactly where he was, kneeling on the worn wooden floor of the ticket booth, one hand still gripping the edge of the lifted panel, the other resting loosely on his knee. The opening beneath him wasn't large, maybe the width of his forearm across. Built carefully between the joists, as if whoever made it had known exactly how much space they needed. And no more. Dust drifted slowly into the hollow, disturbed by the movement. Ronan remained just outside the threshold of the booth, lying down now but not relaxed. His body was still, muscles coiled in that quiet readiness he carried like a second skin. His eyes never left the opening, not curious, not excited, just watchful. Ethan noticed that, too. He had seen Ronan track explosives, hidden weapons, even bodies buried beneath loose soil. The dog never rushed those moments, never acted without certainty. Whatever was inside that compartment. Ronan already understood it mattered. Ethan exhaled slowly and leaned forward. The smell rose first. Old paper, faint metal. Something dry, sealed away from time, but not untouched by it. He reached in carefully, fingers brushing against something wrapped in fabric. Not brittle, not rotted, just aged, like it had been waiting without being disturbed. He pulled it out slowly, a small bundle wrapped in oilcloth that had darkened over the decades. The material was stiff but intact, tied loosely with a thin cord that gave way easily when he tugged it free. Inside, a metal box, rectangular, about the size of a small book, dull gray with scratches along the edges but no visible rust. Ethan turned it over in his hands. Heavy, not locked. He glanced once at Ronan. The dog didn't move. Ethan opened it. Inside, the contents were arranged with a precision that felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. Stacks of old currency, bundled tightly with paper bands that had yellowed and cracked at the edges. The bills were worn, but intact. Their ink faded into a muted green that spoke of another era. He didn't count it. Didn't need to. There was enough to matter, but not enough to explain everything. Beneath the money, wrapped separately, lay a small leather pouch. Ethan lifted it out, opening it with careful fingers. Inside were silver coins, 11 of them, each wrapped individually in thin tissue that had browned with age. The metal caught the light in soft flashes, dulled but unmistakably valuable. And beneath those, a pocket watch. Ethan's hand paused as he picked it up. It was heavier than he expected. Solid, cold. He turned it over, thumb brushing the engraved surface of the case. A name, worn but still readable. He didn't say it out loud. Not yet. He set the watch aside carefully and reached back into the compartment. There was more. A folded American flag, neatly arranged in the triangular military fold, edges still crisp despite the years. The fabric was slightly faded, the blue field dulled, the white stars softened. But it had been kept with care. Respect. That much was obvious. And finally, an envelope. Thick paper, cream-colored once. Now aged into something closer to bone. The edges were slightly curled, but the seal remained intact, on the front, written in careful, slanted handwriting. To whoever finds this. Ethan stared at it. Something in his chest tightened, not sharply, not painfully, but with a kind of weight he hadn't expected. Ronan shifted slightly behind him, the faint sound of claws against wood, grounding the moment back into the present. Ethan sat back on the stool, the envelope in his hands. He didn't open it right away. Instead, he looked down at the contents spread across the worn surface of the ticket desk. The money, the coins, the watch, the flag. Not hidden, not forgotten. Placed. Left. Ethan's fingers brushed against the pocket watch again. Without thinking, he pressed the latch. The cover snapped open with a soft click. Inside, the face was intact, white enamel, black numerals, a second hand frozen in place. Not moving. Dead. Ethan frowned slightly. Then, almost imperceptibly, the second hand twitched. Once, a faint, uneven tick. Then stillness again. Ethan froze. The station was silent. No wind, no shifting beams, nothing. He held the watch closer, listening, nothing. Just his own breathing. Behind him, Ronan let out a low, quiet exhale. Not a growl, not a warning. Something softer, as if the dog had felt it too. Not danger, not fear, but something that didn't belong to the present moment. Ethan closed the watch slowly and set it down. He picked up the envelope. The paper felt thicker than modern stock. Made to last, not to be discarded. The seal cracked with a soft, dry sound as he opened it. Inside was a single folded sheet. He unfolded it carefully, smoothing it out on the desk. The handwriting matched the front of the envelope. Neat, deliberate, each letter shaped with care. Ethan began to read. "My name is Harlan Bowyer." The words settled into the room like a voice returning after a long absence. "I have been the station agent at Whitlock Junction since 1932. Ethan leaned back slightly, the stool creaking under his weight. If you are reading this, then the line is gone. The trains have stopped, and this place has been left behind. He glanced around the room. Left behind. That felt accurate. I am writing this on the final week before closure. The last train will pass through on Friday at 6:42 in the evening. Ethan's eyes flicked instinctively toward the board on the wall. 6:42 p.m. Final. The chalk hadn't faded by accident. I have no family left to give this to. My wife Eleanor passed in 1949. We had no children. The railroad was my life, and this station was my post. Ethan felt something shift. Not understanding, not yet, but recognition. A man who stayed, even when there was nothing left to stay for. I have saved a portion of every paycheck I earned. I did not trust banks after the collapse in '33, and so I kept what I could where I could. Ethan glanced at the money again. It wasn't greed. It wasn't hoarding. It was survival. But I did not leave it here out of fear. I left it here out of belief. Ethan's brow tightened slightly. Belief. Because places like this do not stop being what they are just because people forget them. The words seemed to settle deeper this time. A station waits. That is its nature. It waits for the next arrival, even when none are scheduled. Ethan's grip on the paper tightened slightly. He didn't know why. If you have found this, then perhaps you are someone who needed a place to arrive. Silence filled the booth. Not empty, full. Ethan lowered the letter slowly. For a moment he didn't move, didn't think, didn't try to make sense of it. He just sat there, the weight of the words pressing against something in him he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, brushing against the broken boards of the depot with a low, hollow sound. For a brief second, it almost resembled something else. Not quite a whistle, but close enough to make Ethan look up. He folded the letter carefully along its original creases and placed it back on the desk. Then he reached for the flag. His hands were steady as he lifted it, but slower now, more deliberate. He held it for a moment, then set it beside the watch, beside the money. Everything laid out, not scattered, not claimed, just acknowledged. Ronan rose to his feet and stepped closer. This time he crossed the threshold into the booth. He approached the desk, nose lowering toward the items, not touching, just sensing. Then he sat, directly beside Ethan. The same way he had on countless nights before, when silence was the only thing left between them. Ethan leaned back slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. His gaze moved from the letter to the watch, to the empty space beyond the window where the tracks had once run. Yeah, he said quietly. Not to Ronan. Not to the man who had written the letter. Maybe to both. All right. The station did not respond. It didn't need to. Some places didn't speak. They simply waited long enough for someone to understand. Ethan didn't sleep much that night. The station settled around him in slow, uneven breaths. Wood creaking softly as the temperature dropped. Wind slipping through cracks in the boards like something searching for a way back in. He had dragged one of the benches closer to the stove and laid his blanket across it. Boots still on, jacket pulled tight, but rest never fully came. Not because of the cold, because of what now sat on the ticket desk. Even in the dim glow of the small lantern he'd found and managed to light, the object seemed present. Not loud, not demanding. Just there. like they had always belonged in that exact place. Ronan hadn't left the booth. The dog lay on the floor beside the desk, head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but never fully asleep. Every time Ethan shifted, Ronan's ears twitched. Not alarmed, just aware. Still working, still watching. Morning came slowly, the kind of pale, washed-out light that filtered through the trees before the sun fully committed to the sky. Ethan sat up, rubbing a hand over his face, stubble rough beneath his palm. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he looked up. The desk, the letter, the watch. And it all came back. Not as a shock, but as a weight that had never really left. He stood and crossed the room, boots scraping lightly against the floor. The air inside the station had shifted. It wasn't warmer, not really, but it felt less empty. Ethan didn't like that thought, didn't trust it. He pushed it aside and focused on what he understood. Inventory, assessment, next step. He sat on the stool inside the booth again, the same one that had held him the day before. The wood creaked under his weight, uneven but stable. He looked down at the money. Carefully, he began to separate the bundles. The paper bands crumbled slightly at the edges as he handled them, but the bills themselves were intact. Older print, different texture. Some series he recognized from years ago, others older still. He counted, slowly. Not because he was savoring it, but because he needed to know. $9,320. He said the number under his breath, once, then again. Not disbelief, just confirmation. He leaned back slightly, exhaling through his nose. $9,000 wouldn't change a life overnight. But it could stop one from falling apart. It could buy time. And sometimes, time was everything. Ronan rose to his feet and stepped closer, watching Ethan's hands. "You already knew it was there, didn't you?" Ethan muttered. The dog tilted his head slightly, then looked away. Not dismissive, just uninterested in the question. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. He picked up the silver coins next. One by one, he unwrapped them from the brittle tissue. 11 in total. Each one different in subtle ways. Dates, markings, the way the light caught their edges. He didn't know much about coins, but he knew enough to understand they weren't just kept for value. They meant something. Someone had taken the time to preserve them, to separate them, to remember them. The flag came next. Ethan handled it differently, slower, more deliberate. The triangular fold was tight, precise, military. The kind of fold that wasn't taught casually. The fabric had aged, yes, but it hadn't been neglected. He held it in both hands for a moment, then set it down carefully. Respect, even when no one was watching. Some habits didn't fade. As Ethan reached for the pocket watch again, something caught his attention. Not the watch itself. The desk. He frowned slightly and leaned closer. There, just beneath where the watch had rested the night before, was a faint marking in the wood. Not carved, not scratched, pressed. Like something had been set there, over and over again, in the exact same spot, for years. A circle, barely visible, but perfectly shaped. Ethan placed the watch down inside that faint outline. It fit. Exactly. His jaw tightened slightly. Not because it was surprising, but because it wasn't. Because something in him had already known it would. Behind him, Ronan shifted, just once, then went still again. Watching, waiting. Like he had seen this part before. Ethan pulled his hand back slowly. "Yeah," he murmured. "That tracks." He turned his attention back to the letter. This time he didn't read it from the beginning. He scanned it, looked for the details he hadn't fully taken in before. Names, dates, small things that mattered more than the big ones. Harlan Bowyer, station agent, Whitlock Junction, 1932 to 1958. 26 years in one place. Ethan let that settle. 26 years, same room, same desk, same view out the window. He tried to imagine it. Failed. He stood and walked to the bay window, pushing aside the warped frame just enough to look out. The tracks were gone, but the path remained. A straight line carved through the trees, barely visible beneath layers of leaves and thyme. He could almost see it. The train approaching. The sound of steel on steel. The weight of something moving forward. Always forward. You stayed, Ethan said quietly. Not a question. A statement. He turned back to the room, to the desk. To the place where a man had sat for decades, waiting for things to arrive and to leave. A sound came from outside. Not the wind, not the structure. Footsteps. Ethan moved instantly. Not fast, not panicked, but precise. He stepped out of the booth, hand brushing the knife in his pocket, eyes scanning the doorway. Ronan was already there, standing, still, focused. A figure appeared at the edge of the platform, an older man, tall but slightly stooped, like gravity had slowly convinced his spine to give in. His build was thin, almost wiry, with the kind of strength that didn't come from muscle, but from endurance. His face was long, lined deeply around the mouth and eyes, skin pale beneath a thin layer of sun exposure. His hair was silver gray, cut short but uneven, like it had been done at home with little concern for symmetry. He wore a brown canvas jacket, worn soft with age, over a faded flannel shirt. Dark trousers. Boots that had seen years of work. Elias Boone. He stopped a few steps away, eyes moving past Ethan, to the inside of the station. Then to Ronan. Then back to Ethan. You opened it, Elias said. Not surprised. Not impressed. Just acknowledging. Ethan didn't respond right away. Found something, he said finally. Elias nodded once. Slow. Figured you would. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just measured. Elias stepped closer, boots creaking against the platform. He didn't enter the station immediately. Instead, he looked at the doorway, then the floor, then the booth, like he was remembering where things used to be. I used to come through here, he said after a moment. Not often, just enough. His voice was dry, worn, like something used but not broken. Man who ran it? Bowyer. Didn't talk much, but he remembered everything. Ethan leaned slightly against the doorframe. He left something behind. Elias gave a small nod. Yeah, he said. I figured he might. He stepped inside now, slow but steady. Ronan didn't move, didn't growl, just watched, judging. Then, after a second, he relaxed. Just slightly. Enough. Elias walked toward the booth, stopping just short of the desk. His eyes moved over the items. Money, coins, flag, watch. He didn't touch them. Didn't lean in. Just looked. Long enough to understand. He always said this place wasn't for him, Elias murmured. Ethan glanced at him. What do you mean? Elias shrugged slightly. Said it belonged to whoever needed it next. Ethan looked back at the desk, at the faint circle worn into the wood, at the watch resting perfectly within it. Guess he was right, Ethan said. Elias gave a quiet, almost imperceptible smile. "Maybe," he said. Then, after a pause, "Or maybe you just showed up when you were supposed to." Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The station settled again around them. Not empty, not abandoned. Just holding, waiting. Ethan didn't fold the letter right away. He sat there in the narrow booth, elbows resting on his knees, the paper held loosely between his fingers as if it might fall apart if he pressed too hard. The words had settled into him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Quietly, without resistance, like something he had been carrying without knowing its name. Across from him, the empty rail line stretched beyond the window, a pale scar through the forest. It didn't lead anywhere anymore. Or maybe it did, just not in the way it used to. Elias Boone stood just outside the booth, leaning one hand against the edge of the counter. He didn't interrupt. Didn't ask what the letter said. He didn't need to. Men like him had lived long enough to understand that some things weren't meant to be explained out loud. "You gonna keep it?" Elias asked after a while, voice low and steady. Ethan glanced up. "The money?" Elias shrugged faintly. "All of it." Ethan looked back at the desk, at the stacks of bills, the coins, the watch, the flag, then back at the letter. "I don't think it was meant to be taken like that," he said. Elias studied him for a second, then nodded once. "Good," he said simply. Ethan leaned back on the stool, letting his gaze drift again toward the items. "This place," he muttered, almost to himself. "He really stayed here that long?" Elias gave a small, dry exhale that might have been a laugh. "Longer than most people stay anywhere." He stepped closer now, resting both hands on the counter as he looked out through the same window Harlan Bowyer once had. "Man didn't leave much," Elias went on. "But what he did, he left it right." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "You knew him?" Elias nodded, eyes still forward. "Not well. Nobody knew him well." A pause. "But you didn't have to." The old man shifted his weight slightly, as if settling into a memory. "Winter of '54, he said. "Snow came down harder than anyone expected. Roads closed. Tracks almost buried." Ethan listened, quiet. "There was a kid," Elias continued. "Couldn't have been more than 12. Wandered off from his family, got turned around in the trees." His voice didn't change much, but something behind it did. "Most folks figured the boy wasn't making it through the night." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "And Harlan?" he asked. Elias finally looked at him. "He didn't say much," he replied. "Just lit the stove and made coffee." Silence stretched between them. "Coffee?" Ethan repeated. Elias nodded. Said if the boy came through that door, cold and scared, the first thing he should find wasn't questions. A faint pause. It should be something warm. Ethan looked down at the stove in the corner. Cold now. Empty. But not useless. "They found the kid just before sunrise," Elias went on. "Half frozen, but alive. Said he saw a light through the trees. Followed it." Ethan didn't speak. Didn't need to. He knew that kind of story. Not because he'd heard it before, because he'd lived something close enough to it. Ronan moved suddenly. Not fast, not aggressive, but with purpose. He stepped away from the booth, crossing the room in a straight line toward the far corner near the stove. His nose lowered, tracing along the floor, then up the edge of the wall. Ethan watched, brow tightening slightly. The dog paused at a spot just beside the stove, different from before. Not the hidden compartment, not the desk, something new. Ronan sniffed once, twice. Then he sat down, still looking at the wall. Not reacting, not alerting. just acknowledging. Ethan felt a strange, almost uncomfortable pull in his chest, like the dog wasn't finding something hidden, but remembering something that had already happened. Ethan stood slowly. "What is it?" he asked under his breath. Ronan didn't move. Elias glanced over, eyes narrowing slightly as he followed the dog's line of sight. "Huh," he murmured. Ethan looked at him. "What?" Elias stepped closer, slower this time, his boots dragging lightly against the floor. "Used to be a shelf there," he said, pointing vaguely at the wall. "Small one. Harlan kept a kettle on it sometimes." Ethan glanced at the bare wood. Nothing there now. Just worn boards, faint discoloration where something had once been mounted. Ronan let out a soft breath and lowered himself to the ground. The moment passed, but the feeling didn't. Ethan walked over, crouching near the spot. He ran his fingers along the wall, tracing the outline Elias had described. "You think he kept anything else here?" Ethan asked. Elias shook his head. "No," he said. "If he wanted it found, he'd have left it where you could." Ethan leaned back slightly. That made sense. Everything in the compartment had been placed with intention. Not hidden for secrecy, hidden for timing. He stood again, looking around the station with new eyes, not as a structure, not as a shelter, but as something continued. "You planning to stay?" Elias asked. The question wasn't casual. Ethan took a moment before answering. "I don't know," he said honestly. Elias nodded, as if that was the only answer that mattered. "Fair enough." The old man stepped back toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "Roof's not going to hold through another heavy rain," he added. "And that stove will need clearing before you try to light it." Ethan glanced at him. "You offering advice or warning me?" Elias gave a faint smile. "Same thing most days." He stepped outside, the sound of his boots fading into the gravel beyond the platform. Ethan watched him go for a moment, then turned back inside. The station felt different now. Not warmer, not brighter, but occupied. Not by people, by intention. He moved back to the booth and began carefully placing the items back into the box. Not hiding them. Not yet. Just organizing. Respecting the order they had been left in. The watch went last. He hesitated before setting it down, then placed it gently beside the others. Ronan returned to his side, sitting close, not touching, but near enough that Ethan could feel the presence. Solid, reliable. Ethan leaned back slightly, resting his arms on the counter. His eyes drifted once more toward the window, toward the empty line where trains used to run. "I don't think he left this for just anyone," Ethan said quietly. Ronan didn't respond. But he didn't need to. Ethan exhaled slowly, not heavy, not burdened, just steady. The wind moved through the station again, softer this time, not hollow, not empty, and for the first time since he had stepped through the door. Ethan didn't feel like he was passing through. The first week passed without Ethan noticing where one day ended and the next began. Work had a way of doing that, especially the kind that demanded everything from your body, so your mind didn't have to carry the rest. He started with the roof, climbing up before the frost had even lifted, boots pressing into the brittle wood as he assessed what could be saved and what had to go. The beams were still strong in places, stubborn in the way old things often were. But parts of the shingles had rotted through entirely, leaving the structure exposed to whatever weather chose to pass through. He didn't have the right tools, didn't have enough materials, but he had time. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like something he could use. He worked slowly, methodically, tearing away broken sections, salvaging what he could, reinforcing where it mattered. His movements carried the quiet efficiency of someone who had once rebuilt more complicated things under worse conditions. Except this time, there were no orders, no deadlines, no one waiting for a report. Just him and the station. Inside, the changes were smaller, but no less deliberate. He cleared debris from the waiting area, dragging out splintered wood and rusted metal, stacking what could still burn near the stove. He swept the slate floor with a makeshift broom, pushing years of dust and dirt toward the door, watching the room slowly reclaim its shape beneath the neglect. The ticket booth he left mostly untouched. Not out of fear, out of respect. Everything in there had been placed with intention once. He wasn't ready to rearrange it yet. Ronan stayed close through all of it. The dog moved differently now. Not restless, not searching, but settled into a pattern. He would patrol the perimeter in slow arcs, nose low, checking the edges of the clearing before returning to the station. Sometimes he sat at the edge of the platform, staring down the line where the tracks had once been, ears flicking as if listening for something that no longer came. Other times, he simply stayed near Ethan, watching, waiting. By the fourth day, Ethan managed to clear the stove's flue enough to attempt a fire. It took longer than it should have. The first few tries failed, smoke curling back into the room instead of rising properly, forcing him to adjust, to learn, to adapt in ways that felt unfamiliar after years of operating within strict systems. But eventually, the fire caught. Small at first, then steady. Heat spread slowly through the station, subtle but real. Ethan sat back on the bench, hands resting loosely on his knees, watching the flames move behind the iron grate. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel it. Not comfort, not yet, but something close. And that was when the memory came. Not loud, not sudden, just there. The kind of memory that didn't ask permission before stepping into the present. Sand under his boots, heat pressing down from a sky too bright to look at. The sound of distant gunfire, sharp, irregular, too close. A voice behind him. Young. Too young. "Ethan, wait!" He turned. Too late. Ethan's jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the fire in front of him, but he wasn't seeing it anymore. He was back there. Back in that moment. Back in the space between decision and consequence. "I've got you," he had said. He remembered that clearly, clearer than anything else. "I've got you. I'll get you out." But he hadn't. The words that came after had followed him for years. Not shouted, not angry, just broken. "You said you'd get me home." Ethan exhaled sharply, the sound cutting through the quiet of the station. Ronan lifted his head immediately, ears forward, eyes locking onto Ethan. The dog didn't move closer, didn't make a sound. He just watched. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together as if trying to hold something in place. "I know," he muttered under his breath. Not to Ronan. Not to the station. To someone who wasn't there anymore. The fire crackled softly. Time passed. He didn't track how much. That night, the temperature dropped hard. The kind of cold that settled deep into the bones of a place, pressing against walls that hadn't been insulated in decades. Ethan sat inside the booth, the metal box resting on the desk in front of him, the lantern casting a low, steady glow over its surface. He hadn't touched the contents much since the first day. Not out of fear, out of hesitation. He opened the box now. The money lay exactly as he had left it. The coins, wrapped and silent. The flag, still folded. The watch resting where it belonged. All of it, waiting. Ethan leaned back slightly, his gaze lingering on the stacks of bills. $9,000. Enough to leave. Enough to drive until the road ran out again. Find another town. Another temporary place. Start over. Again. His fingers tapped lightly against the edge of the desk. "You could walk away," he said quietly. No answer came. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then, Ronan stood. Not abruptly, not reacting, just deciding. He walked across the booth slowly, stepping past the desk, past the box, until he stood directly beside Ethan. Then, without hesitation, he lowered his head and rested it against Ethan's hand. Not pushing, not nudging, just there. Warm, steady, unmoving. Ethan froze, not because of the gesture, but because of what it meant. Ronan had done this before, not often, only in the moments when something inside Ethan was about to break in a way that couldn't be fixed easily. Ethan looked down at the dog. "You think I should stay?" he murmured. Ronan didn't move, didn't look up, didn't answer. But he didn't leave either. Ethan let out a slow breath, his hand resting lightly against the dog's head. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "All right." He closed the box, not locking it, not hiding it, just setting it aside. Decision made. The next morning came sharper than the last. Clear sky, cold air, and something else. Movement. Ronan was already on his feet before Ethan fully stepped outside. The dog's posture had changed, no longer relaxed, no longer simply observant. His body was angled toward the tree line, head slightly lowered, ears fixed forward, focused. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Ronan didn't wait. He moved, not running, not sprinting, but with purpose. Ethan followed immediately. No hesitation, no questions. They moved into the trees, branches snapping lightly underfoot as Ethan kept pace, his breathing steady but controlled. Ronan adjusted his speed just enough to keep ahead without losing him, glancing back once to ensure Ethan was still there. Then forward again, tracking. The scent trail wasn't visible, but Ronan didn't need it to be. After several minutes, the forest opened slightly, the ground sloping downward toward a shallow ravine. The air shifted. Colder here, heavier. And then, a sound. Faint. Barely there. "Help!" Ethan stopped. Listened. There it was again. Weaker this time. He moved faster now, pushing through the underbrush, following the direction Ronan had already taken. The dog reached the edge of the ravine first, looking down. Ethan stepped beside him and saw a man, mid-40s, maybe older, lying awkwardly against the base of a fallen tree, one leg twisted at an unnatural angle. His face was pale, lips cracked, eyes barely open. He had been out here for a while. Too long. Ethan moved down the slope quickly but carefully, boots sliding slightly against loose dirt. "Hey," he called out, voice firm but controlled. "Stay with me." The man blinked slowly, trying to focus. I got turned around," he managed. Ethan crouched beside him, already assessing. Broken leg. Dehydration. Early hypothermia. "I've got you," Ethan said. The words came out before he thought about them. The man's eyes shifted, locking onto Ethan's. There was fear there. Pain. But also something else. Hope. Ethan's jaw tightened. Not this time. He worked quickly, stabilizing the leg as best he could, using what he had on hand. Ronan stayed close, alert but calm, scanning the surroundings without distraction. Minutes stretched, effort layered over instinct. Eventually, Ethan got the man to his feet. Barely. Supported him, step by step, back toward the station. It took time, more than Ethan wanted, less than it could have. When they reached the edge of the clearing, the man was barely conscious. But he was alive. Ethan guided him inside toward the bench, toward the fire he had built the day before. Warmth, light, something steady. "I told you," Ethan said quietly, lowering him down. "I've got you." And this time, he did. The man survived. His name was Daniel Price, mid-40s, a mechanic from a small town nearly 20 miles south, though distance meant very little once the forest decided to take its turn with you. He had a broad, square face, weathered by years of outdoor work, short brown hair going thin at the crown, and hands that bore the marks of someone who had spent more time fixing things than talking about them. There was a quiet stubbornness in him, the kind that kept a man walking longer than he should. And that same stubbornness had nearly cost him everything. By the time Ethan got him warm, hydrated, and stable enough to move, Daniel had already understood one thing clearly. He had not gotten out of those woods alone. "You live here?" Daniel asked, his voice rough but steady now, sitting on the bench near the stove, hands wrapped around a dented metal cup Ethan had filled with hot water. Ethan shook his head slightly. "Working on it." Daniel glanced around the station, his eyes taking in the repaired sections of the roof, the cleared floor, the faint warmth settling into the old wood. "Doesn't feel abandoned anymore," he said. Ethan didn't answer that, because he wasn't sure if it was true, or if it was something else entirely. By late afternoon, help arrived. Not an ambulance, not immediately, but a county truck first, bouncing its way down the uneven path, engine loud against the quiet of the forest. Behind the wheel was a man in his early 50s, thick-built, with a square jaw and short-cropped brown-gray hair. Sheriff Nolan Pierce. He stepped out with a deliberate heaviness, boots hitting the ground with the kind of certainty that came from years of dealing with things that didn't always go the way they should. His uniform wasn't pristine. Brown sheriff's jacket, worn flannel beneath, utility pants tucked into boots. But it fit him like a second skin. His eyes found Ethan first, then Ronan, then Daniel. "You the one who called it in?" Nolan asked. Ethan nodded once. He was out there too long. Nolan studied him for a moment longer than necessary. Not suspicious, not hostile, just measuring. Then he gave a short nod and moved inside. The paramedics arrived shortly after, quick, efficient, focused on Daniel. They worked with practiced precision, lifting him carefully, stabilizing what Ethan had already done right. Daniel caught Ethan's arm before they moved him out. "I don't know how I'm supposed to thank you," he said. Ethan shook his head. "You don't?" Daniel looked like he wanted to argue, but didn't. Instead, he nodded once. Then he was gone. The station fell quiet again, but not the same quiet, not empty. Nolan lingered. He stood near the doorway, hands resting on his hips, looking out at the clearing before turning back toward Ethan. "You knew around here," he said. "Something like that." Nolan's gaze shifted briefly to Ronan, who stood just inside the door, posture calm but alert, watching everything without moving. "That dog yours?" "Yeah." "Military?" Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Used to be." Nolan gave a small nod. "Figures." He stepped further inside, his eyes moving across the station, taking in details, repairs, tools, the faint signs of life returning to something that had been left behind for decades. "You planning to stay?" Nolan asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "Yeah." Nolan studied him again. Something in his expression shifted, just slightly. Not approval, not disapproval, just acceptance. "Then you'll want to fix that roof before the next storm," he said, "and clear out that chimney properly. Seen too many places go up because someone thought good enough was good enough." Ethan nodded once. "I'll handle it." Nolan paused, then added, "Word travels fast in small towns. People will start coming by." Ethan glanced at him. "That a problem?" Nolan shook his head. "Depends on what you make it." He turned to leave, stopping just outside the doorway. "Good work today," he said, not looking back. Then he walked off. The next morning, someone came. Then another. Not all at once. Not organized. Just people. A woman in her late 60s, short and round with soft white hair tucked beneath a knitted hat, arrived first. She carried a small jar of honey in both hands, as if it were something fragile. Her name was Evelyn Pike, a widow who lived alone just beyond the ridge, known in town for speaking little, but remembering everything. She didn't ask questions. Just handed the jar to Ethan and said, "For the coffee," before turning back the way she came. There was no coffee yet, not officially, but the idea had already taken root. Later that afternoon, as Ethan stood near the stove, trying to adjust the heat so it would hold longer, Ronan shifted suddenly near the door. Not tense, not alarmed, but immediate. The dog rose in one smooth motion, moving toward the entrance before Ethan even heard the sound. Footsteps. Light. Uncertain. Ronan stopped just inside the doorway, standing tall, ears forward, body blocking the entrance, not aggressively, but deliberately. Ethan turned. A young woman stood at the edge of the platform, early 30s, tall and lean, with dark brown hair pulled back loosely at the nape of her neck. Her face was pale from the cold, sharp-featured but softened by something in her expression. Fatigue, maybe? Or something heavier. She wore a moss-green ranger parka, worn at the cuffs, and carried a small backpack slung over one shoulder. She didn't step forward, didn't speak, just stood there. And for a brief second, Ronan didn't move, didn't bark, didn't let her pass. He simply watched her, as if deciding something. Then slowly, he stepped aside. The woman exhaled softly, like she had been holding her breath longer than she realized. "I heard about what happened," she said, her voice steady but quiet. "The man you found." Ethan nodded. "He made it." She gave a small, relieved smile. "Good." Her name was Mara Bellamy, a forest ranger. She moved differently than most people. Light on her feet, aware of her surroundings without needing to look directly at them. There was a calm efficiency in her posture, the kind that came from years of working in places where mistakes weren't easily forgiven. "I patrol this area sometimes," she said. "Didn't think anyone was living out here." Ethan glanced around the station. "I'm not sure I am either." That earned a faint smile from her. Over the next few days, more people came. A retired engineer named Marcus Linwood, who brought an old railroad lantern and left it without ceremony. A young couple hiking through the area, who stopped for water and stayed longer than they planned. An older man who said nothing at all, just sat on the bench for an hour before leaving behind a folded $5 bill. Ethan didn't ask for anything, didn't charge. He simply kept the stove lit and started boiling water. The first time he poured coffee, it felt strange. Not unfamiliar, just different. He set the cup on the counter, watching the steam rise in slow curls. Ronan sat nearby, eyes tracking the movement of the door as another set of footsteps approached. Always the first to notice, always the first to stand. Ethan kept the watches close. His old military one stayed on his wrist, Harlan's remained on the desk, and the letter, folded carefully, rested beneath them. One evening, as the light faded into the long blue of approaching night, Ethan sat inside the booth again. The station was quiet, not empty, just at rest. He reached out and placed both watches side by side on the desk. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, he leaned closer, listening. Tick, tick. Both of them, same rhythm, same time. Ethan sat back slowly, not surprised, not questioning, just understanding. Outside, the forest shifted with the wind. Inside, the fire burned steady. And near the door, Ronan lifted his head once more, already aware of someone approaching before they ever reached the clearing. Ethan glanced toward the entrance, then back at the watches. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel lost. Some places don't die, they don't disappear, they don't forget. They wait for the right person, for the right moment, for the one who knows how to listen. The station had waited. Ronan had led him there. And Ethan had finally arrived. There are moments in life when everything seems lost. When doors close, paths disappear, and the world grows quiet in a way that feels permanent. But sometimes, what feels like an ending is only a place where something unseen has been waiting all along. Not by accident, not by chance, but by a design greater than anything we can fully understand. Maybe that is how God works. Not always through loud miracles or sudden answers, but through small, quiet moments. Through a place we stumble upon, a stranger who shows kindness, or even a loyal companion who leads us where we need to go. Sometimes, the miracle is not in changing our circumstances overnight, but in guiding us, step by step, toward the place where we are meant to begin again. Ethan thought he had lost his way. But what he found was not just a station, not just a second chance. He found a reminder that no life is ever truly forgotten, and no act of kindness is ever wasted. What is given with sincerity has a way of finding its purpose, even years later, even in the hands of someone who never expected to receive it. And maybe, just maybe, there are things in your life right now that feel broken, delayed, or lost. But what if they are not gone? What if they are simply waiting for the right moment, the right place, the right version of you? If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a reminder that hope still exists. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, and what part of this story stayed with you the most. And if you believe in stories that bring light back into the quiet places of life, consider subscribing to Veteran Dog Stories so you don't miss the next journey. May God watch over you, guide your steps even when the road feels uncertain, and place the right people and the right moments in your path when you need them the most.